The sun burned red over the wide plains of Dustwell, sinking lower and staining the sky with streaks of fire. The wind carried dust across the barren earth, rattling dry brush against weather-worn fence posts. Samuel stood at the edge of his ranch, leaning on a shovel, his shirt soaked with sweat, his body thin from hunger and back-breaking work. His ranch had been passed down through 3 generations, but by the time it reached him, it was little more than a dying patch of dirt. The cattle were gone. Disease had taken them one after another, and the only horse left was too weak to plow. All Samuel had now were empty pastures and debts that grew heavier with every sunrise. That morning, as he dragged himself from the barn, he'd overheard townsfolk laughing in the market square. "Samuel's so desperate he'd sell his soul for a cow," one of them said. Another added with a chuckle, "He don't need a wife, he needs a miracle." They didn't know he was listening, but he'd heard every word. He kept his head down, but his pride bled. He was no fool. He knew his ranch was dying, and he knew he couldn't carry on like this much longer. But when he heard the stranger's offer later that day, he wondered if fate was cruel, or if it had just handed him the strangest kind of miracle. She had stepped off the carriage as if she'd fallen out of another world. Her name was Clara, though no one in Dustwell had ever seen her before. She was big, with a roundness that drew whispers and stares in a town that prized lean, hardened bodies shaped by labor and hunger. Her face was soft, unremarkable to some, but her dark eyes lingered heavy on anything they touched, and her mouth stayed pressed in a line that betrayed nothing. She said little, and when she did, her voice carried a weight that silenced even the cruelest laughter. Behind her trailed the most beautiful animal Samuel had seen in years, a cow so fat and healthy its hide gleamed under the sun. A cow that could mean milk, butter, calves, trade, survival. Samuel stared at it like a starving man stares at bread. His gut twisted. His ranch could live again if that cow were his. He could mend fences, breed cattle, buy seed for planting. His father had always told him a ranch was only as strong as its herd, and right now Samuel's ranch was a graveyard. That single cow was hope standing on 4 legs. Clara had come with a proposal that sounded like madness. Marriage. No courting, no questions, just vows in front of a preacher and the exchange of rings. In return, the cow was his. She would live with him, and in the eyes of the town, they would be husband and wife. Samuel's heart hammered when she spoke those words, and he studied her face, looking for some trick, some shadow of deceit. But she was unreadable. All she said was yes or no. Decide now. The town gathered, of course. Dustwell thrived on gossip, and the thought of Samuel, the poorest rancher in the county, marrying a stranger for a cow was too rich to miss. They filled the benches of the weathered chapel, faces glowing with amusement, children giggling at the back, women whispering behind handkerchiefs. Samuel felt every eye on him as he stood at the altar, his shirt collar tight around his throat, sweat dripping down his temple. Clara stood beside him, tall and wide, hands clasped calmly in front of her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't blushing. She wasn't anything at all, just steady, unmoving as if the whispers didn't touch her. The preacher stumbled over the words, clearly confused at the union. "Do you, Samuel Hargrove, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold?" Samuel's mind drifted. His eyes flicked once, just once, to the cow tied to the post outside the chapel door. The beast stood patient, chewing cud, unbothered by the chatter. That cow was worth more than all the land Samuel stood on. And all he had to do was say 2 words. "I do." The words left his mouth dry, his tongue heavy. A ripple of laughter coursed through the room. He felt his face burn, but he kept his eyes forward. The preacher turned to Clara. "And do you, Clara, take this man?" "I do," she said firmly, her voice sharp enough to slice the whispers in half. And just like that, the vow was sealed. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. The crowd erupted into clapping, some mocking, some genuine. But Samuel heard only the pounding of his own heart. He wasn't sure what he'd just done. He wasn't sure if this was salvation or ruin disguised in a wedding dress. After the ceremony, Clara didn't linger. She walked out with the same quiet determination she'd arrived with, holding the rope tied to the cow. Samuel followed, his stomach twisting. The men slapped him on the back, laughing. "Never thought I'd see the day." One shouted, "A cow for a bride." Another roared. Samuel ignored them, but his fists curled at his sides. He wasn't marrying for love. He was marrying for survival. And survival wasn't funny. Back at the ranch, the shadows stretched long across the empty fields. Samuel felt the silence pressing around them as he led Clara inside. The house was small, its walls scarred by years of storms and neglect. He cleared his throat. "It ain't much," he muttered, "but it's home." Clara glanced around once, then set down her bag. She didn't complain. She didn't thank him. She simply said, "The cow needs shelter." "Where's the barn?" Samuel blinked at her, then pointed. Together they walked the animal inside. For the first time in months, Samuel felt a flicker of pride as he watched the cow settle into clean hay. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow there would be milk on the table. Tomorrow he could ride to town and trade butter for grain. Tomorrow the ranch would start breathing again. But when the sun dipped low and the crickets began to sing, Samuel's thoughts turned to the woman now living under his roof. Clara moved with quiet efficiency, unpacking her bag, folding clothes into neat stacks, humming a tune he didn't recognize. She didn't speak unless she had to, and when she did, her words were short, almost clipped. He studied her face when she wasn't looking. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way the town girls were, but there was something solid about her, a strength she carried that unsettled him as much as it intrigued him. When night finally fell, Samuel stood outside the door to the bedroom. His chest tightened with unease. This was his wife now. He had spoken the vows. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the town, they belonged together. He reached for the door handle, hesitated, then turned it. But the latch didn't budge. It was locked from the inside. He froze, his hand still on the handle. "Clara?" he called softly. No answer. He knocked once. It's our wedding night." Still silence. He frowned, knocked harder. The only response was the steady hum of crickets outside the window. A flicker of anger burned in his chest. He hadn't wanted this marriage, not truly, but he had gone through with it, endured the laughter, the shame, all for that cow. And now his wife was shutting him out on the very first night? Samuel stood there, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. He could force the door, but something in Clara's silence stopped him. Something in the way she had looked at him at the altar, steady and unshaken, told him she was not a woman to be pushed. So instead, he let his hand drop. He turned away, grabbed a blanket from the chair, and walked out to the barn. The cow shifted softly in the straw as he lay down beside it, the smell of hay thick in the air. He rested his head against the rough wood wall, staring into the darkness. He had a wife he didn't understand, a cow that meant everything, and a future that suddenly felt as uncertain as the stars blinking far above the silent plains. Samuel woke the next morning to the smell of smoke and the faint crackle of firewood. For a moment he thought the barn had caught fire, and he shot upright, heart racing. But the barn was quiet except for the soft breaths of the cow. The smoke was the good kind, wood smoke from a stove. He stumbled out, stiff from sleeping on straw, and followed the scent back to the house. Through the open kitchen window he saw Clara moving with a rhythm that startled him. She was already up. Apron tied across her front, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair bound in a simple knot. She stirred something in a heavy iron pot, her movements efficient, practiced. On the table sat a jug of fresh milk, steam rising from it, and a plate of biscuits stacked higher than Samuel had ever seen in his own kitchen. He stepped inside, half in disbelief. She didn't look at him. "Wash up," she said firmly, as if she had lived here all her life. "Food's near ready." Samuel blinked. He'd imagined she would be awkward, maybe shy, maybe even unwilling to lift a finger. After all, why would a stranger marry a poor rancher if not to escape some worse fate? Yet here she was, cooking like she'd been waiting years for this stove, her face unreadable but her hands quick. He sat slowly at the table, watching her. His pride bristled. He didn't like being ordered in his own house, but hunger was stronger than pride. When she set the biscuits down, he reached for one. It was warm, soft, buttery, the kind of biscuit he hadn't tasted since his mother was alive. He ate two before speaking. "You locked me out last night," he said, his voice rough, testing the waters. Clara didn't flinch. She kept stirring. "Work first, talk later." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. After the meal, she pulled on her boots, tied her hair tighter, and walked straight to the barn. She milked the cow, cleaned the stalls, and even fixed a section of fencing that had been leaning for months. Samuel stood nearby, pretending to check a post, but mostly he watched her. Her size, which the town had mocked, seemed less a burden and more a kind of anchor. She was steady, tireless, and unbothered by the dust or the sweat. By noon, he found himself doing more than usual. Her pace pushed him, shamed him even. He couldn't be seen doing less than his new wife. Together they cleared brush, hauled water, mended troughs. The ranch, which had been slipping into ruin, suddenly felt alive. But at night, when the stars spread wide across the sky and the cicadas sang, the same pattern returned. Samuel climbed the steps to their bedroom, hesitated at the door and found it locked, always locked. He stood there waiting for some sound, some word. Nothing, only silence like she'd vanished into a void. He slept in the barn again, wrapped in the same blanket, his cheek pressed against rough boards, questions gnawing at his skull. Days turned into a week, then 2. The town gossiped louder than ever. Men in the saloon joked about whether Samuel had ever even touched his wife. Women giggled behind their hands when Clara walked by in her plain dresses. But the laughter began to sour. They noticed Samuel's ranch wasn't crumbling anymore. They noticed he had milk to sell, butter to trade, even a little cream for the wealthier families. His debts, though not gone, grew lighter. And when they mocked him now, Samuel felt a twinge of something new, defiance. Let them laugh. His ranch was breathing again. Still, the nights gnawed at him. Every evening he tried. He knocked softly, then harder. Sometimes he spoke. "Clara, it's me." Or, "We're married now. Oughtn't we live like it?" Sometimes he stayed longer, hoping she would answer. But she never did. She only rose before dawn, always first, always working, as though the dark hours never happened. One night, after too much whiskey at the saloon, Samuel returned angry, his boots crunching against the dry dirt. He stumbled up the steps, pounded on the locked door with the flat of his hand. "You think I'm a fool? You think I don't see it? You got secrets, woman, and I'll get 'em out of you one way or another." His voice cracked in the empty hallway. From behind the door there was no reply. Not even a stir. That silence cut sharper than words. Shame burned through the whiskey haze. He slid down against the wall, head in his hands, and fell asleep there. The next morning, Clara set breakfast as usual. No sign of anger, no mention of his outburst. Her eyes, dark and steady, passed over him once, but whatever she thought remained locked behind them. Samuel felt smaller under that gaze than he had in front of the whole town's laughter. Weeks passed, the cycle unbroken. Work by day, locked doors by night. Yet Samuel began noticing things he hadn't before. Clara avoided questions about where she came from. If someone in town asked, she'd steer the talk elsewhere. She never mentioned family, never spoke of friends or past towns. Her belongings were few, a bag of plain clothes, a worn Bible, and nothing else. Once Samuel saw her staring at the horizon, eyes narrowed, her jaw tight. It was the only time her mask cracked, and there was something in that look that chilled him. Fear. That evening, as the sun bled red over the fields, Samuel leaned against the barn rail, watching her brush the cow. "Why Dustwell?"
he asked quietly. Her hand stilled for half a breath before she continued.
"It was far enough," she said. "Far enough from what?" She didn't answer. The mystery gnawed at him harder than hunger ever had. He lay awake some nights in the barn, staring at the rafters, wondering who this woman really was. Why she had come. Why she had chosen him. Why she locked him out. He replayed the moment at the altar, her eyes steady, her voice firm, and realized she had never looked desperate. If anything, she had looked determined, like she had chosen him not out of love, not even out of necessity, but for a reason he could not see. The ranch grew stronger. Fences stood straight, pastures cleared, water flowing where it hadn't in months. Neighbors grudgingly admitted Samuel's place looked less like a ruin. Yet the more his ranch revived, the more his unease grew. Clara was at the center of it all, a woman who gave everything by day but locked him out by night, who cooked like she'd been waiting her whole life to feed someone, but never shared her own hunger, her own story. Then came the night that changed everything. Samuel had spent the evening repairing a broken trough, his hands blistered, his back aching. The stars were sharp above him as he climbed the steps to the house. He paused outside the locked door, as always, his palm pressed against the wood. His voice was softer this time, almost pleading. "Clara, why? Why won't you let me in? I've given you nothing but my word, my name, my roof. And you," his throat tightened, "you give me everything in the daylight and nothing when the sun falls." For the first time, a sound came through the door. Not silence, not footsteps, a voice low and trembling. "Because once you know the truth," Clara whispered, "you'll run like all the others." Samuel's breath caught. His hand pressed harder to the wood. "Try me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've lost everything already. There's nothing left you could take from me." Silence followed. But it wasn't empty silence. It was heavy, alive, waiting. He stood there long into the night until his legs ached and his eyes blurred with fatigue. No more words came. Finally, with the weight of her confession clinging to him, he stumbled back to the barn. He lay beside the cow, staring into the dark, his mind reeling. She had said others. Others who had run. Others who had known something about her he did not. Samuel closed his eyes, his jaw tight. Whatever truth she carried, whatever shadow followed her, he would find it. He couldn't run, not anymore. He had a ranch to protect, and now he had a wife who carried a secret that might be more dangerous than all the droughts and debts combined. The air was colder that evening, a strange chill crawling across the plains as Samuel returned from the far pasture. The horizon burned faint with the last of the sun, shadows stretching long across the land. His boots dragged in the dirt, his body sore, but his mind sharper than ever. Clara's words had not left him. "Once you know the truth, you'll run like all the others." Those words had taken root, and no matter how hard he worked, they clung to him, whispering. What others? Who had she been with before him? What truth was heavy enough to make her bolt her own bedroom door every night? He couldn't shake it. When he reached the barn, Clara was already there, lantern light flickering across her face as she brushed down the cow. The animal stood calm under her hand, chewing, tail swishing. Clara didn't look up as Samuel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. He studied her silently, his jaw set. She carried herself the same as always, solid, steady, no hesitation in her movements. Yet after hearing her voice tremble the night before, he saw something different now. He noticed the way her shoulders tightened slightly whenever the wind gusted, as if she were listening for something far off. He noticed how her eyes, when they lifted, swept the horizon before settling anywhere near him. She was searching, watching. Samuel stepped forward, boots crunching on the dirt floor. "Clara," he said, his tone quieter than usual but firm. She glanced up once, then returned to her work. "Why don't you tell me what you meant?" "What I meant?" she asked, as if pretending she didn't understand. "You said I'd run like the others, that you keep the door locked to hide some truth. I've been patient, but patience don't last forever. I deserve to know who I married. I deserve to know why you're really here." The brush slowed in her hand. She placed it down on the rail, wiped her palms against her apron, and turned to face him fully. Her eyes met his, unflinching. "And if I tell you, Samuel, will you stay?" The question cut through him like a knife. He wanted to say yes, wanted to swear it without hesitation, but the way she asked it made his chest tighten. He swallowed. "I'm still here, aren't I? Whatever it is, it can't be worse than losing everything I already have." Clara studied him for a long moment, as though measuring the truth of his words. Then she let out a slow breath and leaned back against the stall door. The lantern light threw her face into sharp lines, shadows under her eyes, her mouth pressed thin. "I didn't come here for love," she began, her voice low. "I didn't even come here for a husband. I came here to hide." Samuel's brows furrowed. "Hide from what?" "Not what," she said. "Who?" His stomach turned. "Go on." She looked past him as though her mind was reaching back years. "The cow isn't mine. It belongs to a man who wants me dead. I took it when I left because it was the only way I knew I'd be able to survive long enough to get away. That cow is worth more than a fortune, Samuel. It's a marker, a trail. He'll follow it and he'll find me." The words hung in the air, heavy as thunder. Samuel stared at her, his heart thudding. "You're telling me you stole that cow?" "Yes. And you brought it here." "To my ranch?" "Yes." Samuel dragged his hand over his face, pacing a step before turning back to her. "Do you have any idea what that means?" "If he comes looking." "He will come looking," Clara interrupted. "That's why I locked the door. That's why I keep you out. I thought if I stayed apart, if I didn't let you in, then when the time came you could turn me over without a fight. You wouldn't have to care for me. You wouldn't have to risk your life for mine." Her words cut him deeper than she could have known. Samuel's chest burned, his pride and his anger clashing in a storm. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd hand over my own wife to save my skin?" Her voice softened, almost broke. "That's what every man before you has done." The barn seemed to go still, the cow's quiet breathing the only sound between them. Samuel stared at her, stunned. She had said others before. He had thought she meant suitors, some vague past. But hearing her now, he felt the weight of betrayal she carried. Whoever she had been with before, they hadn't stood by her. They hadn't chosen her. They had run. He took a slow step forward, his boots crunching softly.
Clara, you married me.
You live here. You work harder than anyone I've ever known. And all this time you thought I'd turn you in. You thought I'd be like them? She didn't answer. Her eyes glistened in the lantern light, though she didn't let a tear fall. He reached for her, hesitated, then gently laid a hand on her arm. She didn't pull away, but she stayed stiff, braced as if she expected him to shove her aside. Instead, he squeezed her arm lightly. I don't care what you stole. I don't care what you're hiding. What I care about is this ranch, and right now you're the only reason it's still standing. You think I'd give that up? You think I'd give you up? For the first time since he'd met her, her expression cracked. Not much, but enough. Her mouth trembled, her eyes dropping, a war raging inside her. Then she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. You don't understand, Samuel. He's not like other men. If he finds me, he won't stop at me. He'll burn this place down. He'll kill you too. He'll make sure no one who touches what's his survives. Samuel's jaw tightened. His hand drifted instinctively toward the rifle leaning by the barn door. He wasn't a stranger to violence. Life on the ranch had taught him to fight for what was his, whether against wolves, thieves, or the land itself. But the way Clara said it, the way her voice shook with the certainty of someone who had seen it before, made his stomach knot. Then let him try, Samuel said, his voice low, steady. If he wants to take what's mine, he'll have to come through me first. Clara's eyes snapped to his, searching, desperate to know if he meant it. He held her gaze, not flinching, not backing down, and in that silence something shifted between them. For weeks they had been bound only by survival, by the weight of a cow and a vow. But now Samuel felt the stir of something else. A loyalty, a fire, a choice. The night stretched on, the lantern burning low. Clara finally spoke again, softer. I didn't mean for you to be caught in this. I thought if I stayed behind locked doors, you'd stay free of it. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have come here at all. Samuel shook his head firmly. No, you came here for a reason. Maybe you don't see it yet, but I do. This ranch needed saving. I needed saving. And maybe you did too. I don't know what's coming, Clara. But if he finds you, he won't find you alone. She looked at him for a long moment, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she turned back to the cow, brushing its flank with slow strokes. Samuel knew the conversation was over for now, but the air between them had changed. The locked door upstairs no longer felt like rejection. It felt like a wall built from fear. And walls could be torn down. When Samuel left the barn that night, rifle slung over his shoulder, he didn't try the bedroom door. He didn't knock or plead. He simply lay down in the barn again, staring up at the rafters, his mind burning. The truth was out now, at least part of it. Clara was running, hiding from a man who owned more than a cow. He owned her fear. But Samuel had made his choice. Whatever storm was coming, whatever danger followed her, he would not run. Not like the others. And though the night was quiet, Samuel could not shake the feeling that the ground itself was holding its breath, waiting for the sound of horses on the horizon.